Welcome to Matt's Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thank you for stopping by. As I said previously, and I reiterate how much I appreciate that. Madame Lagarde, at a recent presentation, I think it was at Wellesley College, said there are some grey clouds, but aiming higher, trying harder, and doing it together, we can gain new momentum and bring the blue skies. Admittedly, and I wrote about this over the weekend, those grey clouds what she's talking about, I called current world affairs fluid and uncertain. That link is up there. I'll put up a photograph of Madame Lagarde, Hannah and myself on the 6th of January at the Intercontinental, and as Hannah gave her roses, she said a number of things, and Hannah says to her, I want to be like you. And Madame Lagarde replied, work hard and you can be anything you want to be. And I thought that was a great message. Fabulous lady, having had a chance to get a little bit close and personal. Tough as well, there's a whole team around her. One misstep and she's tough. Inclusive. I love the stuff about female emancipation. I think that's right on message. Erudite. Very and plain impressive, frankly. If you haven't seen her Mindspeak session, do look at it. That link's on Rich Wrap-Ups. Home thoughts. All the girls were at home last night. Nishat, Aisha, Layla and Hannah. And of course Sahara, the golden retriever. And though I'd been away only for a couple of nights, I never left the hotel, in fact. And actually, I like being in a tip-top hotel at a wonderful spa. I just sort of plunked myself in there for an hour. I really enjoyed myself. And, because everything is at such an elevated level, maybe it's just because of something of late where too many people I am speaking to have wanted to duck below that level. I said to Nishat, what is it? Why do people assume that I'm even going to consider or swallow the unpalatable? Been about 2 or 3 discussions like this. And just because I'm not returning forcefully, I'm listening, but I've already made a decision, and I think people don't realize that at times. It's not because I'm not considering it, I'm considering how I'm going to expunge and delete. That's what I'm considering. Let's get that right. Anyway, it felt like an eternity being away from the family. I said to Hannah, thank you, darling, for the email, because we now have this wonderful father-daughter email love-in going on at the moment, and I cannot tell you how much I appreciate it. I get these lovely messages from her. I send messages back, which are totally honest. I do love her more than the world. I tell her. And we write the sweetest things to each other. And she's asked me to come to see her cross-country today, so I'm going to go and do that. And of course I turned to Layla, who's extremely headstrong and a great athlete, and not pursued it until now with any purpose. And I said, I'm so happy you're in the athletics team. And I am, because in life it's all about doing things that you are good at. If you are good at something and you're doing it regularly, it makes you feel infinitely better, I think, than if you're not. And as she got off her school bus, I turned to Nishat and said, this is about Aisha. What a grown woman. I was looking at her from one side of Muthaiga Mini Market, which is a little place where the parents come to collect their children from all kinds of places. I was looking at Aisha get off, and I thought, my goodness, how has time flown? Getting up to feeling a bit old. And then I thought of all the time that has passed, my mother, my grandfather, and my grandmother, whom I spoke to in Swahili because I could not speak any Indian dialect, but I can understand it. And my Naseem auntie, who was a lovely lady and lived when I went to Westminster in London. I used to spend my weekends with her. And all of these people whom I loved and who loved me, and I refuse to believe it ends in the ground. So there you go. Some little thoughts. I'll put up that photograph of the flower display in the Ritz-Carlton, which was rather good, and then give you that Rainer Maria Rilke quote, which I like so much. The future enters into us in order to transform itself in us long before it happens. And I think he's spot on. This is a sentence from an article. He has been using energy as the spear of his already highly militarized foreign policy. The result has been a sophisticated weaponization of oil that puts the energy mavens of the Bush administration to shame. That is the point. President Obama, I mean, it's extraordinary that anyone would consider sort of tarnishing him with the yellow paint, calling him a coward, because I mean, it's been a breathtaking move in the oil market, where basically prices have had their kneecaps taken out. And essentially it's because of the US flooding this market with oil. And it's very deliberate. And it has massive geopolitical repercussions as well. Obama administration is wielding the oil weapon against two of the world's leading producers, Iran and Russia. I think it's certainly being wielded against Russia, I think, in the background. And it could not happen. It's a sort of, I don't know what percentage to put it, more than tail risk that that Iran will be rehabilitated as a replacement for Russia and as a way of putting more pressure on Russia. Embargoes, trade sanctions, far greater impact on world output, reflecting White House confidence that in the pursuit of US strategic interests, anything goes. Well, it does. There is another factor no less crucial in the aggressive use of the oil weapon as an essential element of foreign policy. The increase in domestic crude output has imbued American leaders with a new sense of energy omnipotence, allowing them to contemplate the decline in Iranian exports without trepidation. In an April 2013 speech at Columbia University, Tom Donilon, then Obama's national security advisor, publicly expressed this outlook with particular force. America's new energy posture allows us to engage from a position of greater strength, he avowed. Increasing US energy supplies act as a cushion that helps reduce our vulnerability to global supply disruptions and price shocks. It also affords us a stronger hand in pursuing and implementing our international security goals. Important. As with the introduction of drones, the United States now enjoys a temporary advantage in energy warfare. Have a look at this chart I'm going to put up, which is a 1 month chart, and we're down 6.2% this week alone. Massive geopolitical fallout and repercussions, huge pressure now being put on Russia through this. And having looked at the oil markets ever since I was a young boy, and I find it fascinating because it's so caught up in geopolitics. You get moments of massive disconnect when you can make a lot of money. But at this point in time, if you were to say to me, where's it going from here? We're at $83 now. We were above 100 not too long ago. It could go to 60. And if you put that in your spreadsheets, and it changes a lot of things. It's very bullish for someone like Kenya at this moment. Hong Kong has cancelled crisis talks with democracy protesters. Pro-democracy protest leaders called on supporters to flood the city's streets today after the government called off talks aimed at ending the 2-week standoff. And clearly Beijing is playing a game here, got them off the street, and that slowly but surely you're going to tire them out, I think. And these were one of the points I made, amongst others, in that interview I did with CCTV. That link is up there as well, because I covered these points. I was talking about the hit to the economy, saying if it was a blip, it would be negligible, but if it's a new normal, it's going to be severe, and I think that's absolutely the case. But I'm not sure. I think this time the Beijing has drawn the sting and holds the cards, but that is not to say it's not going to come back more virulent at a later date. Adam Gopnik, I looked at this article yesterday, but if you haven't looked at it, look at it. It's very interesting. The terrorists inside our heads, and that takes me back to Don DeLillo, who really was for me and is for me the contemporary writer who understands this best. And of course that quote I had before, one of the marks of our world is perhaps this reversal. We live according to a generalized image repertoire. If you allowed it to become imagery running on perpetual loop in your mind, the planes exploding, the people leaping, you would never be past it. The president of the World Bank warns the future of Africa is at stake as WHO issues a 60-day deadline to get the Ebola epidemic under control. World Bank President Jim Yong Kim said the future of Africa could be determined by the global response to the Ebola epidemic. Unless we quickly contain and stop the Ebola epidemic, nothing less than the future of not only West Africa, but perhaps even Africa is at stake, he said at a meeting in Washington. Thomas Frieden, director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, told the World Bank that it was critical to work now to avoid the virus sweeping the world. Speed is the most important element here, he said, adding that this is controllable and this is preventable. I did that interview, and if you jump to 15 minutes, that Al Jazeera interview with Laura Kyle, I said a lot of these things, and at the time everyone said I was bonkers, but I wasn't, I think. And I thank Laura for that interview, because it's always good to have a timestamp on things when you want to say something which is not being said by everybody else. Ebola virus magnified 108,000 times, I'll put that up. And I said this before on the 18th of August, that viruses are non-linear and exponential. And I think on the 25th of August it was gaining velocity, and at the moment, if you look at the chart, it's not reducing in that gain. We still have yet to turn parabolic in point of fact. I'll put up a photograph of a convoy transporting a Spanish nurse believed to have contracted the Ebola virus from a 69-year-old Spanish priest leaving Alcorcón hospital. And we've learned that a British man has died of the deadly virus in Macedonia, and one other taken ill. That report is not confirmed yet. The WHO, and I don't know because I haven't been able to find the original citation, but in this article in Global Research, which tends to be conspiratorial, but this is what they're saying: World Health Organization contradicts US Centers for Disease Control, admits Ebola can spread via coughing, sneezing, and contaminated surfaces. Issued a bulletin, I haven't seen it, I've tried to find it, which confirms what Natural News has been asserting for weeks, that Ebola can spread via indirect contact with contaminated surfaces and aerosolized droplets produced from coughing or sneezing. Wet and bigger droplets from a heavily infected individual who has respiratory symptoms caused by other conditions or who vomits violently could transmit the virus over a short distance to another nearby person. That's WHO released this week. This could happen when virus-laden heavy droplets are directly propelled by coughing or sneezing. That same bulletin also says the Ebola virus can also be transmitted indirectly by contact with previously contaminated surfaces and objects. In other words, WHO has just confirmed what the CDC says is impossible, that Ebola can be acquired by touching a contaminated surface. Food for thought. In transmitting President Richard Nixon's orders for a massive bombing of Cambodia in 1969, Henry Kissinger said, "Anything that flies on everything that moves." John Pilger, interesting article on Rich Wrap-Ups, if you want to have a look. Kim Jong-un's control of North Korea remains normal. That's what the South is saying, but is yet to appear. And today he was due to visit the Pyongyang mausoleum, where the bodies of his father and grandfather lie in state. He didn't show up. So clearly it's quite fluid. It's difficult to read. It's a very impenetrable and opaque place in the best of times. Of course, I wrote a piece in November 2010. Far away in distant lands lies the Hermit Kingdom. This land is ruled by the House of Kim. Apparently his sister is probably in charge right now, and its capital is Pyongyang. The first and eternal president was Kim Il-sung, and his successor Kim Jong-il, whose designated successor is Kim Jong-un. They all have had tiny little hands, like the elves and the shoemaker. Currency markers. The euro has had a bit of a bounce of late. 2-week highs 126.98 when I looked last. Dollar index 85.48. I think this is an entry point. Japanese yen 107.80, pretty strong of late. Appreciated 1.7% this week. First gain since the period ended August 8. Swiss franc 0.9536. The pound above 161 at 161.18. Aussie 0.8770 fell after the Bureau of Statistics said home loans dropped 0.9% in August. India rupee 61.13. South Korean won 1069.75. Rial 239.82. Egyptian pound 714.76, and the South African rand 1106.09. The yen has advanced 1.1% in the past month, most of that this week. Dollar 2.3%. I am an enormous dollar bull. And the euro gained 0.2%. I think in the dollar's case we're going to see one big strong number. and boom, off we go. I'll put up a 3-month chart. I think this pullback is an entry opportunity. Euro dollar, I think we're below 120 by year end. Gold, 1222.02, I think you sell the rebound. I'll put up a 1-year chart. It's a dead cat bounce in my view. Crude oil down 6.1% this week alone in a bear market. Futures fell 2.5% yesterday, biggest weekly drop since June 2012, talking about the shale boom. And I think it's a geopolitical calculation. President Obama has flooded the market. He's forced Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia also reduced prices. So you've had a very, very interesting development. We look to be in a capitulation phase in the oil market where investors are acquiescing to the reality of the supply overhang. So interesting developments now. Coming to Africa, Dhlakama, he's this rebel who was holed up in the Gorongosa Mountains. Comeback kid rides election wave, says Agence France Presse. Former rebel leader Alfonso Dhlakama is pulling huge crowds on his presidential election campaign, to the surprise of observers who wrote him off after his long exile in the bush. Thousands packed the airport of the second largest city of Beira on Sunday, broke through security cordons and streamed onto the tarmac when his plane landed. In similar scenes last week, crowds massed on the landing strip in the remote northwestern Angonia region near the Malawi border, initially preventing his plane from landing. Footage broadcast on national television showed capacity crowds in the coal-rich Tete province where people crowded onto rooftops to see Dhlakama. I have never seen this before, Dhlakama said in Tete. But he has resuscitated himself politically, and his campaign is like an emotional tsunami, said Francisco. Something to consider, but it's a big call to win this one. But, I mean, this is pretty interesting. I'll put up a photograph of Pemba Island, Mozambique, seen from the sky. And The Economist has an interesting piece talking about Mozambique's elections boom and ballot. Across Maputo, in between the crumbling colonial era buildings, luxury apartments and hotel complexes race to the sky. Visible reminders of Mozambique's stellar economic growth, an average of almost 8% a year over the past 14 years. Talking about the electoral risk and saying, Dhlakama's getting a big boost. They're mentioning as well young voters who never knew the brutal years of war are curious about this old fighter and the mythology that surrounds him. This, for young people, is very exciting. He is the Rambo, said a Renamo leader who participated in the talks. Carlos Nuno Castelbranco, director of the Institute for Social and Economic Studies in Maputo, sees trouble ahead regardless of the outcome. He describes all three parties' campaigns as paying only lip service to crucial economic issues. Chief among them is the rise in public debt, which has doubled in 4 years, approaching 50% of GDP. Future income from gas is being sold against debt. We are now beyond the threshold of risk. We are building a bubble, he said. The volume of gas is so spectacular, and therefore, sure, other risks, preeminently political and how that plays out that election, remain elevated. But from a financial perspective, Mozambique is said to be the next Qatar, as I said, and the debt load remains well inside forward limits. I put up a photograph I took of the Maputo evening when I was there in Mozambique, and it's a lovely visit. And I wrote a piece saying Mozambique could be the next Qatar. I'll put that up again if you want to have a look at that. South Sudanese lawmakers have passed a controversial security bill, hotly debated, gives security forces the right to arrest suspected criminals without a warrant. You can imagine how that's going to be abused, can't you? I've been up there a couple of times. South African all shares up 4.057% in 2014, but we're at 6-month lows here. Dollar rand softened out 11.10. I think that will go to 12 before the end of the year. Egyptian pound 714.76. Egyptian stock market edged 0.37% lower yesterday. It's up 40.843%. It's really been on a tear since CC came in. Nigerian all shares at 18-week lows and now down 1.83% in 2014. Ghana Stock Exchange is up 3.54% in 2014. Interesting piece in the Harvard Business Review, 7 Reasons Why Africa's Time Is Now. Have a look at it, Jonathan Bell. Interesting piece in Economist: charcoal and terrorism in Somalia, a charred harvest. Listen to this: the cafes on Abu Dhabi's seafront. It's a lovely place, Abu Dhabi. Fill as soon as the sun sets and the heat abates. Men gather around water pipes, smoking tobacco flavoured with melon, berry, or perhaps even cappuccino. A thin boy scurries from table to table with a bucket of hot coals. Those enjoying such evening ideals may not know it, but their love of smoking shisha is fueling a bloody insurgency more than 3,000 kilometers to the south in Somalia. This is all about the charcoal trade. Very interesting article. Do have a look. Kenya is selling bonds dedicated to covering the infrastructure deficit. 12-year bonds worth 15 billion shillings at a fixed rate of 11%. The proposed bond is it's free of tax, so you gross that up. I expect these bonds to trade towards 10%, and I think they're a screaming buy. The IMF sees capital flows into Kenya topping 167 billion shillings by June 2019. Kenya shilling is at 89, as I said before in September. It's confounded expectations before, and it will confound them again. The Nairobi All Shares up 18.85% this year, 1.831% below a record set on the 23rd of last month. NSE 20 up 7.023%, 134 points below a more than 6-year closing high set on the 22nd of last month. Equity turnover came off yesterday. The previous on Wednesday session traded 2.192 billion. Kenya Orchards is up over 4,000% as of today. Can you believe that? That's extraordinary. I look at this thing all the time. I never saw that coming. It's just amazing. EGADS, that's the only coffee play at the Nairobi Securities Exchange. Big piece traded across a couple of days back. Coffee prices on a very bullish run, right? Best performing commodity this year. Safaricom unchanged at 12.85. They're going to release first half earnings in the first week of November. And, I did that interview with Bobby. If you haven't seen it, that's linked on Rich Wrap-Ups as well, where he said voice usage was up 30%. Now, even if you take into account some deterioration of price, that puts voice revenues, which were 60% of the full year earnings, probably less now, about 58. But if that puts that at double-digit growth, I think. I'm sure. Serena has been on a little bounce. It's up 9.48% over the last 4 weeks. All the bad news is baked into the price. Diamond Trust has traded very heavily of late. It's traded just under 2% of its shares over the last 2 sessions. Up 34.89% in 2014. KCB unchanged at 59. We're just a small margin, 1.66% below an all-time closing high. We're going to take that out reasonably quickly. Equity Bank, there was some news that they had problems with the cash machines, ATMs, and I think that had turned the stock a little bit defensive. It's still up, 61.78% year to date, but it's corrected just under 17% since reaching a record on the 23rd of September. Britain was a big faller. I've been banging on about how that PE was so elevated. Report out that some of the managers have left to set up a real estate business. Traded limit down for most of the session. Unga rallied 5.83%. That's up 202% year to date. The link is up there. Generally, I think we're seeing a lot of rotation lately, which is interesting and expected. And of course, small caps performed outstandingly. But we remain in a bullish mood over here, I think. Once again, thanks for stopping by. Wishing you a great weekend.